Welcome. My name is Gabriel Ritter, and I am the director of the Art, Design, and Architecture Museum at UC Santa Barbara. Thank you for joining us for tonight's event, ESPÍRITUTECTUAL, Ana Serrano and Christopher Suarez in conversation with Rafa Esparza, which is generously sponsored by Kitchell. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's event and our participants this evening. Tonight's talk is part of a year-long celebration of exhibitions and public programs commemorating the 60th anniversary of the Architecture and Design Collection, ADC, here at the AD&A Museum. The ADC is a world-renowned resource for the research and study of the built environment in Southern California from the late 19th century to today. Founded in 1963 by architectural historian David Gephardt, the collection has grown over the last 6 decades to include nearly 290 archives of architects, landscape architects, and industrial and graphic designers, consisting of over 2 million architectural papers and models. In connection with the current exhibition, Christopher Suarez, ESPÍRITUTECTUAL, tonight's artist panel's discussion explores the unique urban architecture of Latino neighborhoods in Southern California. Suarez defines the term ESPÍRITUTECTUAL as, quote, used to describe the individual and collective relationship that we have with our built environment, pertaining to the spirit that emanates from the connection between people and the places they call home, end quote. With that in mind, Portland-based artists Ana Serrano and Long Beach-based Suarez will each give a 15 to 20-minute presentation on their work, followed by a conversation moderated by Los Angeles-based artist Rafa Esparza about growing up in Southern California, how the area's built environment has influenced their work, and the relationship of these unique spaces to family, community, and the creation of culture. Ana Serrano was born in Los Angeles, California. She earned her BFA from Art Center College of Design in 2008. Serrano is a first-generation Mexican-American and is inspired by the intersection of her dual cultural identities. She is best known for creating work that references the built environment using brightly colored cardboard and paper. She has exhibited her work in solo and group exhibitions, including the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Vincent Price Art Museum, the National Museum of Mexican Art, and the Craft and Folk Art Museum. Christopher Suarez was born and raised in Long Beach, California. He received his BFA in ceramic arts from Cal State Long Beach. Suarez has served as the lead Arts Bridge teacher at Cal State Long Beach and as the education intern at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles. Suarez was awarded a summer 2001 residency at Township 10 in Western North Carolina, and most recently was artist in residence at the American Museum of Ceramic Arts in Pomona. His work has been exhibited at Sebastian Gladstone, John Wolfe Fine Art, and Werby Gallery at Cal State Long Beach. Rafa Esparza, born in Los Angeles and who also lives and works in LA, received his BA from the University of California, Los Angeles in 2011. He is a multidisciplinary artist whose work reveals his interests in history, personal narratives, and kinship, his own relationship to colonization, and the disrupted genealogies that it produces. Esparza's work is in the collections of LACMA, the Dallas Museum of Art, the San Jose Museum of Art, Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Whitney, and the Guggenheim, among many others, and most recently was awarded the 2022 Perez Prize. Please join me in welcoming tonight's panelists.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to share my screen here. And Gabriel, can you confirm that you can see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Give me 1 second. Let me make sure I have this correct. Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Like Gabriel said, I'm Ana Serrano. I was born in LA and grew up in Los Angeles. I wanted to start with this piece here titled Carnonlandia. It's one of my first pieces that I made that dealt with the built environment and architecture. It's made entirely out of cardboard and paper, and it was one of my first explorations into using that material. Um, Now I went through school for an illustration program, and there was a lot of drawing involved, but as I went through school, I felt like I really wanted to make things three-dimensionally. I really wanted to work with my hands, and something that I had done since I was really young, and this was like a natural like thing for me to do, is to make work three-dimensionally. So I started making these um, pieces that were referencing the built environment and architecture. All of these pieces are from around 2008 to 2012. I started creating these small sculptures, like tabletop pieces that were referencing really like the environment that I grew up in, which were like the Latino neighborhoods in Los Angeles. But even though I was just looking at Latino neighborhoods in LA, I felt like a lot of this same sort of like style and like visual cues were found in Latino neighborhoods in every part of the country. So one of the things that I really try to focus on when I was making these small dioramas were focusing on the use of color and looking at how color has this perceived value, where the more muted the color is, the less bright or the more cool tone rather than warm tones are like perceived as like of higher value, right? Like you see it in homeowners associations where you have a very limited palette of like what a homeowner can do, what a business owner can do. And so I was looking at all of these things through that lens, and I was really trying to highlight like the use of bright color in the work. So when I looked at a lot of the neighborhoods around Southern California, now LA is great because it has such like an eclectic like architecture styles, and it has all these ethnic enclaves of just like so much like visual language in the urban landscape in LA. And I was looking at how different all of these neighborhoods are, and sort of looking at um at the differences in like the socioeconomic elements, and trying to highlight the businesses that were found in different areas. In a lot of my work, I use cardboard a lot and paper. I find that like cardboard is a throwaway material that's often is not your typical traditional art material. And I like using it, and I like elevating it to the status of like it being worthy to be shown in a gallery space, and it being worthy to be shown in a museum space. And I feel like it has sort of like this kinship with the type of architecture that I'm trying to highlight here, which is like these very humble buildings, these very utilitarian spaces. So even though cardboard is seen as throwaway or even ephemeral, like not worthy of recognition, um, I felt like it was the perfect material for these buildings. because in a way, a lot of the buildings that I do tend to highlight are very utilitarian buildings, and they're not sort of these historical buildings by famous architects. Like, I'm looking at how I'm looking at like these buildings that were just altered and modified by like the people that live there. And that was really my attraction, is with these buildings, is looking at these spaces and being able to like really tell like who lives there, who works there, there's so many visual cues that we can get just by looking at a building. And so I was always constantly very observant of the way like homeowners and business owners will like alter the facades of their environments and sort of like reclaim it and make it their own. In a lot of ways, I see like the way that Latinos engage with their built environment as sort of like a form of resistance, right? You're changing in a way the environment to sort of like things that are familiar to you. So like I said, that the use of bright colors is something that is very like indicative of like all of Latin America and the architecture that we see in Latin America. And so to be able to see, a whole community bring that sensibility and immigrate with that sensibility and use it in their space around it is really like interesting to me, and is what I'm all constantly observing. The next few images are just reference images that I take. They're all just iPhone photos. Like, I usually take them while I'm walking around or just through the window of my car. Like Gabriel said in the beginning, I'm based in Portland now, but I grew up in Los Angeles. So all of these images are from Los Angeles. And, when I go back and visit family or, go down there, I always make sure to like just capture as much reference as I can. But these are like sort of like the things that interest me, the landscape that I like find really interesting and sort of like worthy of documenting, and also worthy of like making work of or from. These next few slides are from an exhibition I did in Houston, Texas. It was titled Salon of Beauty. Basically, it was my first sort of go at creating work at such a large scale. And before, I was working with the smaller scale pieces. And so this gave me the opportunity to sort of like supersize the work and also really give people and viewers and visitors to the gallery this opportunity to really feel like submerge in the environment and have an opportunity to sort of like travel through like the space of it, which would mimic sort of the way that I related or interacted with the urban landscape was just to be like immersed in it. And again, this was still made with cardboard and paper and a few other materials. But they were all, including the previous work, all of the work that I make has always been sort of like an amalgamation of places. Like they're, these spaces aren't, or they're not, I'm not referencing exact locations. That's what I'm trying to say. They're just, I take like what I find interesting in the built environment and I create my own sort of like imaginary, like landscape and imaginary architecture. This next series of works were inspired. These are two-dimensional pieces, and they were inspired by sort of like the front yards and the way Latinos use front yards and use that space, right? It's always sort of like, if you go to like Latinos neighborhoods, you can see how like the front yards are very activated. Like you could see them using it to like put a kiddie pool. You'll see a bouncy house for parties. You'll see tents up for, birthday parties and all of that. And so I wanted to focus on like the front yard and how it is used. This next piece is called Homegrown, and this was at the Pasadena Museum of California Art. And this is around 2018, I believe. And I started sort of shifting from just looking at the urban landscape, but also like looking at like personal narratives and like trying to enmesh these two things. So this piece was sort of an ode to the plant life and my family's connection to the land, and how it has changed over just like one generation. So before my family immigrated to the US, they had access to a lot of land. They grew a lot of things, had animals, and, were able to have that lifestyle. But within one generation, now we are living in an urban lifestyle, and yet, even though we don't have access to so much land to grow things and grow our own food and stuff, we still try to use what little we have. So even though we're like constrained to the urban environment, you still grow your nopales, you still plant your roses. This is a snake plant, a rue plant, or like ruda in Spanish. And so all of these plants were things that my family has consistently grown, no matter, where we lived in LA, but that they also grew in Mexico. And so it was a way to sort of like enmesh these two like complicated like histories. And so that's sort of like where I feel the work is going now, is sort of how personal the urban landscape can get and how much history it can hold for, in the personal level. And that's my last slide. So I think we're gonna hand it over to Chris now.
Sweet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. All right. Share screen. Of course, no, that's not there. Hey, Gabe, do you happen to have the presentation on your end? For some reason, it's gone on my end.
Yes. Let's see. Let me pull it
I
up.
don't know where it went.
All right, I'm going to share this. Does everybody see that?
Oh, sweet.
And just keep me posted on how you want to move it.
Cool. All right. Let's see. Oh, so are you going to be pushing?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's see. I don't know why. Cool. All right. We could just start right here. That works. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here. Thank you to Rafa and Ana for also participating in this conversation. Rafa, you've been a really big inspiration. And I appreciate all the love, the support, and the guidance that you've shared with me over the past 2 years since we met. And Anna, ever since Gabriel introduced me to your work, I've just been amazed by the work that you create, and I'm a huge admirer of your work. So I'm honored to be here today. But yeah, so just to get started, I wanted to start with a picture of my grandmother's house. This is pretty much where I draw so much inspiration from in the work that I create. This is where my mom grew up. This is where my grandfather moved in 1955. So this pink house here is where they lived. It's where my mom and her family grew up. And my uncle, my grandfather's brother, bought the house right next door. So I usually try to take into consideration this exact history that I'm looking at, which is my family history and its connection to the land, and as well as the built environment of Long Beach. So Gabe, if we can move forward, please. And this is actually a sculpture of my house, which is right across the street from my grandmother's house. So thinking about that connection that I have to family is extremely important in my work. I think about how my family has been there to support me in everything that I do and create, and how they have helped me to kind of just build the life that I have right now. But yeah, maybe if we go to the next slide, Gabe. Thank you. All right, so I definitely want to start the talk by like taking into consideration that there's probably some students in the audience or young artists that are listening right now, and I kind of just want to start with the journey of how I got to where I'm at right now. My first class that I ever took for art was probably in high school, either my junior or senior year. And it was just out of necessity to graduate. I did not think twice about it. I enjoyed the class, but it wasn't something that I was thinking as like, oh, this is something I can do, or this is something I want to do. And I really had no other relationship to art at that point in my life. I would draw and doodle a little bit in my notebook, but never took it seriously. And I went into college. I went to Cal State Long Beach with intentions of completing a degree in business. And I did that for about 2 years before I took my first accounting class and realized that I couldn't continue doing that. So I took probably like 2 semesters trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and ended up taking some design courses. And in those design courses, I felt that I could be more creative in what I did, and also have a fallback. I always felt like design was a safer route than art. Everybody had that opinion of art being this major or this passion that people have that is very difficult to enter. And I guess fortunately, design said I had too many units and said, hey, why don't you go to the art department and see if they'll let you in? And luckily they let me in, and I had a friend take me to the ceramics department, and walking into that environment just felt right. I knew that once I started studying art, I wanted to build. I knew that working 3-dimensionally was something that I wanted to practice and to learn about. So I knew I was either going to be doing like something with wood or sculpture, but once I walked into the ceramics department at Cal State Long Beach, I kind of knew, and just felt and followed that intuition of like, oh, I think this is where I need to be. And let's see, maybe Gabe, if you go another slide forward, and maybe, oh, you know what? Okay, this is an older PowerPoint, but no worries, that's fine. I'll continue with just kind of the history of what I was doing. So at my time at Cal State Long Beach, I really struggled with projects and really had a hard time kind of enjoying what I liked. I never had a history of making things and being creative. So it was really difficult for me to kind of tap into my own creativity. But there was something there that kept me in, like, just going. And I think it was probably my exposure to like the different artists that were at Cal State Long Beach, and also to my friends. It was probably the first time that I was around people that were extremely passionate about what they did, and seeing that passion and that drive that they had definitely just kept me in the room, and kept me just working hard and trying to get better at whatever it is that I was doing. And at that time, I don't think I consciously knew what I was exploring, but deep down, it was still the same themes that I'm exploring today. And it has to do with, my relationship to my own cultural identity, my relationship to home and family, and looking at the world as a whole, thinking about society and how we leave our marks on our built environment. So at that time, I was making a lot of vessels and exploring different structures and mediums as well. I was looking at a lot of indigenous pottery and thinking about how those cultures would use clay and ceramics in their daily lives, whether it was functional items or items of religious religious items. And I really enjoyed how they embedded their own culture, values, traditions into the ceramics. And I always wanted to work in that same manner, thinking about how do I put into my work the values that I hold, the values that my family holds, or the values that my culture and community holds at large as well. And so slowly but surely, I kind of kept working at it. I was making different vessels, and I would cut windows into them, thinking about domestic spaces. I was thinking about clay as a recorder of time and place. So I would throw slabs on the ground at my grandma's house, and I would transport it back to school, and I would build some large vessels out of there, and began to decorate them in a way that allowed me to play around with intuition and the unknown. I would paint them and decorate them without knowing what materials I was using, like what glazes or what reactions would happen in the kiln, and leave it up to chance. And then soon after, I kind of strayed away from vessels and the pot and started thinking much more on like a physical relation, or the body, and how the body relates to time and space. So I would map out the city of Long Beach and start to run routes that were in my neighborhood and the whole city at large. And there's a project that I did in 2021 or 20, no, it was in 2020. So this was shortly after everything had closed. I began training for a long distance run that mapped the entire city of Long Beach, and, or at least close to the city of Long Beach. And on, I think it was close to my birthday, probably like the end of November, I embarked on a 50-mile run that followed the route and the border of the city of Long Beach. And that for me was very much a personal project that was an endeavor to kind of get closer to the land, get closer to the built environment, and just see places that I didn't recognize or wasn't aware of that was Long Beach. So I just definitely wanted to deepen my connection with home and strengthen that relationship. And then let's see, in 2021 or 2022, but But Gabe, can we go back one slide? Yeah, perfect. We'll start right here. So this is kind of the beginning of what my work looks like as of right now. Before this, I started exploring the vessel again, but I treated it in a way that I would mimic the surface of a building that you might find on the street. So a heavy like stucco texture, and I would paint it and layer it with glaze and airbrush, and I would, scratch into it. I would get wood and kind of beat the clay up to resemble this passing of time. And I think there was a heavy interest on surface and texture, because I kind of wanted to record the passing of time and reflect a community's touch on a surface that you might find in the street, and kind of reveal what these communities or the people that live there, I wanted to reveal the marks that they leave on a surface. So I was doing that with vessels, and then shortly after, I kind of just asked myself, like, why don't I actually make the places that I'm thinking about? Why don't I make the buildings that I'm referencing, or the businesses that I'm looking at when I'm trying to record a community's time in a certain place? So this is a building that's right down the street from my house called Casa Sanchez. And it was one of the first buildings that I made. And I just, like Anna, was thinking about the colors. I was thinking about the advertisements that they would put, the signages, and kind of relating it back to just the human touch and how these colors or these styles of signage represented a community. And I wanted to honor that as well. So yeah, just the next couple of images are just different buildings that for me hold a special place in my heart and I can regard as home. They're places that I enjoy taking friends to that maybe aren't from around here or have never spent too much time in Long Beach. And then I was also looking at spaces that to me were sites of cultural reproduction, cultural sustainability. So for me, the carnicerias are those exact sites. They're safe spaces for, I think, people of Hispanic descent, whether, I have history in Mexico, so that's how I relate to it. But yeah, there's certain feelings of going in there and kind of feeling like these places keep me in touch with where my family's from. So I wanted to honor those exact spaces, and I would look at certain things and replicate them, or I would pick from other spots and kind of put it onto another, because I think as a whole, these spaces, whether it's the carnicerias or the mercados, they hold the same kind of value for me. But I would also try to include in the piece like memorabilia of my own family or symbols or names. So this is actually Ramirez Ranch Market, but like I went ahead and changed it to Ramiro's, which is my father's name, just for fun. All right, yeah, let's go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So even within the same work, I feel like I'm always trying to document and archive places that signify and show or that to me show so much life. This is a spot that's right down the street from where I live. And 7-Eleven, Little Caesars, Subway are all spaces that I think also reveal the socioeconomic status of this area. So it could be like early in the morning, or like right after school, and these places are packed with the high school kids that are right next door. So I want to be able to capture the places that people spend time in and record that. Can we go to the next one, please? I'm also thinking a lot about structures and how we kind of relate to them in space, and how they call our attention, and also thinking about the businesses that exist in communities and how they provide, sustenance, and allow us to survive. All right, yeah, let's go to the next one. So this is from a duo show that I had at Sebastian Gladstone Gallery, and this was with the painter Audrey Gare. But yeah, I just wanted to include kind of just to show how they're exhibited and how they look on a different scale. We go ahead and go to the next one, Gabe. Okay, so the next few images are images of kind of just what I usually look at in my environment to gather inspiration, and thinking about the different methods of the different methods in which people and business owners throw their own identity onto these buildings, and thinking also about how structures are put in space and their function in space as well. Thinking about like liquor store signs and markets as like high up in the sky just to grab our attention. So yeah, these next few images are just what I'm usually looking at. So we can go to the next one, Gabe. I also started to like really look at the business names and the way in which these structures are built and where they're placed, and how their names really signify like where you're at. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. So this is a piece that I created while at AMOCA. I really I wanted to expand what I was making and think about more of, or include more of the cityscape. So not just the building, but also the roads and the automobiles that we're using. And even in these pieces, I'd look specifically at certain places like the Long Beach Muffler Shop. It's right across the street from my house pretty much. And this little truck has got the logo of the company that my dad worked for. So still trying to honor home, honor my own family history, and include that in the works. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. So this is an installation shot from the show that just opened up at the museum in Santa Barbara, the Art Design and Architecture Museum. And so, yeah, I really wanted to challenge myself with this show. I wanted to include works that weren't just the buildings. So I pushed myself to fill and make pieces that really made the viewer kind of think about how they relate to different structures in our environment. So specifically looking at the PCH and Redondo liquor store sign. That was a piece that took a lot, but it was also a challenge in learning how to work with others. I had to ask my dad for help on this one, which for me was special because it was the first time that I included my dad in like a project. And so to just see how our relationship functions and using art as a way to not only build something physical, but to also build relationships. And even with the piece that's right in the foreground, which is the East Side Plaza sign, I had a good friend of mine, Francis Arujo, help me out on this piece in the construction of it. So I kind of wanted to view works made with others as these exercises in building relationships. And I kind of was thinking like the similarities between building a structure where we're physically building something, but also building something that isn't physical, like a relationship. So I definitely found great joy in exploring that. All right, let's go to the next one, Gabe. Yeah, just some more close-up shots. I really began to look at signages. So as you can see on the background, there's the liquor store sign. And I wanted to, as I said, I wanted to not stray away, but include more of the built environment into my work and into my own vernacular. But I began to look at certain places and piece places together. So this liquor store sign is not an actual liquor store sign, and the title is something that I made up called On God Liquor. And for me, I kind of wanted to also start documenting language and how language is used, and thinking about who uses what language. So for me, On God was very reminiscent of youth culture at the moment, saying On God, or it's not just youth culture, but that's where I started hearing it, thinking about like my little brother and my cousins. So definitely trying to make sure that I'm still referring and referencing family and culture at large. All right, we go to the next slide. So in this one, I wanted to kind of highlight the image or the piece on the far left-hand corner at the bottom, which is the Hyundai truck, and we've got like billboards and the freeway signs. For me, the work is very much inspired by home, but it isn't excluded to Long Beach. This is a piece that was inspired by my time of commuting to Pomona and making work at Amoca. So that exact exit sign is where I would get off for that. So very much a lot of my pieces are about honoring not only the built structures or the businesses, but also the whole cityscape, whether it's the roads or the structures that come off of the freeways. It's everything. I want to include the cars and celebrate all of that. Let's go ahead and go to the next one, Gabe. That might be close to the end. Yeah, these are just some closer images of the works that were in that show. This is Anaheim Street Center. This is I've don't have like a huge special history to this one besides driving by it pretty much since I was a little kid. But I know that my mom shopped here when she was younger. I know friends that go here, and I was thinking about the different businesses that exist in these neighborhoods and kind of trying to highlight the aesthetic identity of culture that is embedded into physical structures. I was also challenged for the first time thinking about domestic space because there's living spaces, apartments right above these. So it was my first time including like people. I don't have a close-up shot, but in that center window, there's a couple embracing each other. And I definitely wanted to, I was thinking about domestic space and what happens in domestic spaces. And I wanted to highlight kind of an intimate moment in that window, just reflective of love and family. Yeah, let's go to the next one. So this is a part of that same building. I built it separately just because of ceramic constraints. But again, I wanted to challenge myself with including more people and more life. So I actually took a photo of a good friend that's in that window and kind of just pondering, thinking about life and what's happening. And yeah, let's go to the next one. Oh, that's just a detailed shot. So when I'm usually working, I try my best to include a lot of smaller detail images in the work. One, it's a challenge for me technically, but two, I enjoy this smaller scale because it forces viewers to get close to the piece and to make them stop in their tracks. And I hope to compel people to do that in their actual daily life. So that's one of the reasons why I enjoy like working on a smaller scale and painting these really tiny images. We can go to the next one, Gabe. So I included this restaurant. It was kind of funny. I began making it before I had gone there, and then I hit up a friend and they wanted to grab some food, and we ended up here and got to talk to the owners and you know, meet them and show them the piece, and kind of just automatically, or not automatically, but you end up knowing these people on a different level, which I really appreciate. But I think this one kind of highlights the diversity of Long Beach. And I wanted to really highlight and document these places, which is immigrant working class neighborhoods, and honor these places and celebrate them. Because I'm as I'm growing older, I'm beginning to see all the changes that are taking place, and I want to document these places because it could be the last time that we see it. Everything is just changing so fast. So I want to make work that highlights these spaces. I don't know if there's a photo after that one, but we can check.
No, that's the last one.
All right.
Beautiful. Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Anna. Thank you, Gabriel, for gathering us to share our works and have a conversation. I mean, there's so many through lines in both of your works that I could speak to. And I really appreciate in both of your works, actually, like the attention to how you're looking at the built environment, these urban landscapes, in particular, these aesthetics that you've clocked on as coming from like a lower economic working class communities, which I could see your work very much at the forefront of what I see as like a I don't know, just a group of artists, not necessarily a movement, but definitely a group of artists that are starting to kind of point to our neighborhoods, point to the these kind of like mom and pop shops, small businesses that really make up the visual vernacular that we kind of live in.
Yeah.
And likewise, Christopher, the way that you're also looking at these businesses that you kind of like grew up going to, that you have like a strong connection to by merely like growing up and going to these places. And so I have like a few questions that I wanted to ask that pertain to these questions regarding aesthetics, but also the kind of like precarity in which our communities exist in because of a lack of resources, or maybe an uneven distribution of resources within our communities. But before that, I had just like an interest in formal, like just kind of like formal considerations within both of your practices in terms of scale. I really, really appreciate both of the ways in which both of you are working in a very particular scale. I know, Anna, you've you've grown your pieces into ones that are more immersive, closer to life size.
Mhm.
But seeing your work makes me really think of growing up and going to like public school in Southern California. And I think it's around the 4th grade where you're taught about like the history of mission system in
Yep.
California.
Yeah, I
And
did one.
I feel like most of us did, right? Thankfully, that
Yeah.
curriculum has now been like stricken. So
Yeah.
it's not like mandatory, but I remember like having to build a miniature
Hmm.
of a mission, and we would pick a mission, we would go on a field trip to a mission. And it's a very specific way of asking a young person to look at an architecture, right? And
Yeah.
to in many ways uphold it and study it, and grant it a level of value and importance. And so
Yeah.
I wanted to maybe give you both a moment to speak to how you're thinking about scale within both of your practices.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that like you made that connection with the California mission, because that's exactly like a project that I've done, and that when I've kind of like gone back and looked at like why, like question like why am I interested in the built environment, and why do I want to make things like 3-dimensionally, and that's something that I always go back to is my school projects, because you know no one in my family was an artist, so all of my sort of like connection or like exposure to art was always through crafting, and it was always through school projects, or just whatever access we had, which was like going to Michael's or going to Joanne's, and like that kind of like that was like the introduction to it. um and so yeah, I very much um like I feel like that's where like that interest started, and especially working it at a small scale. um like what you're saying, it's like you do assign it value when you create like a maquette of something, and it was something that I didn't see a lot of, was assigning value to this very utilitarian type of building, to this very like basic just down the street type of building. And so like I think it is worthy of preserving, and also especially because our communities are like constantly changing and they're constantly being gentrified, and that's something I'm always like constantly like documenting, like through like Google Maps. Like I'll go back and look at what a building looked like and how it has changed. And it's very, I mean, it's very obvious. Like you have houses that used to be these bright colors, right? That were, probably immigrant families lived in it. And then you get people coming into the communities and they paint it black, or they paint it white, or they paint it gray with the bright colored door. Like it's very, like the difference is so stark. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about scale, I definitely was thinking about kind of how Anna explained, which is assigning value to these places. And also with working with ceramics, you have constraints when it comes to like kilns. There's certain sizes. When it comes to studio space, I can only go so big, and trying to construct a replica of an actual architectural space with clay, I think can be extremely difficult if you want to go life size. To kind of go small, there's a process in the making that I found really interesting, which was it made me a better observer of my own environment. So walking down these near these shops, or when I'm driving, is like taking closer looks and really trying to absorb everything. And there's a challenge in working with a smaller scale, like answering the question, how am I able to put all of that energy, all of that spirit that I'm looking at into the smaller piece. So I think that's really interesting, but it's also been fun to work with other materials like such as metal and wood and cement that allow me to go larger quicker without thinking about like something like needing a kiln. But I also found that working with these materials, I felt like I was able to build my own like city or tell my own story through these exact buildings. So I found that really interesting.
I mean, you know, it's maybe like a strange word to use, precious, but I want to use it because there is something really beautiful that you both are kind of like looking at when you're seeing our communities that feels worthy of like preservation, worthy of keeping. There's something precious, and there is something really precious about the objects that you're also making. So it's like, I don't know, there's like the poetics feel like very potent and palpable in both of your works. I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of the precarity that I mentioned just a little bit ago, and preservation. As both of you were kind of showing your works, I was thinking so much about like just like all of the different visual information that we get from how you are both sculpting and building these objects and installations, and they're both of designs and aesthetic sensibilities that are being cultivated by small business owners, like people that live in these houses that are kind of like choosing a color palette, choosing the types of gates that are surrounding their homes. But then there's also the layering of like mass advertising alongside like the advertising that's happening by the kind of like small businesses. And I was thinking so much of like, in thinking of like what you're saying, Anna, like how in flux our communities constantly are, how they're constantly evolving, you know, to some degree with some autonomy, but oftentimes also like forcibly, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious about maybe hearing you both speak a little bit about this idea of preservation and how you see it functioning in your work. And it could, you know, I think the question is I think it's a hard question, because I really like, I'd like to know like how you think about like what your feelings are about these spaces that are fleeting always already, and how you're choosing to capture it in the moments that you're kind of like making the work. I know that Anna, you're not citing specific places, and Christopher, you are, but I'd like to maybe hone in on like the moments and the aesthetics that you're both kind of choosing to amplify or honor and represent in your works.
Yeah. I mean, I always choose these moments where I feel like you can, like, they're very subtle visual cues, but they're there. Like, for example, like LA has a lot of like craftsman homes, right? But a lot of them in the Latino neighborhoods had been stuccoed over. So like that is like the most, like when I think about LA, I think about like a stuccoed craftsman, like, you know, and that says a lot about the people that live there. It's like, is it a disregard of history, or is it just like because these are the resources that we have and we need to like, this is a house that we have and we need it to like preserve it for longer, you know? And I admire that. Like, I'm not someone that's like, I don't know, I like the idea of like the Latino community claiming these spaces and being like, you know, this is in our history, but and we don't need to assimilate, and we don't need to follow what the standard like American value is, you know, or whatever. Like I like that you're bringing stuff from like where you're from and you're altering the built environment. And so I feel like that's what I'm constantly thinking about is like how like these moments of like there were when this is something I struggle with, because I feel like I don't know if a lot of these choices are so intentional. You know, I don't think like the guy that's going to Home Depot and buying like bright ass pink paint for his house is like, you know, trying to like resist assimilation, right? I don't think so, but like that's kind of like the way I see it, and that those are like the very small subtle things that I like to pick up on, you know. And I feel like every sort of ethnic enclave in LA has these like little visual cues, not just like Latino neighborhoods. If you go to like predominantly Asian neighborhoods, like they have their like visual cues as well of like how they interact with their built environment. So I don't know if that answers a question,
Yeah,
but
no, totally. And I think it's also like there's an energy to that, even if it isn't like one of like resisting assimilation, there is something about like maybe it's like an oops, like a gallon of paint, you know.
yeah,
That was like, it's not the color I wanted, but it's close enough and it's cheaper, so I'm just gonna get.
exactly. It's like what is available to you, or like, you know, like, yeah.
What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was funny because I think in that first image of my grandma's house, it's like totally pink. But I definitely regard my work as a form of preservation and documentation. And it's very much a response to the environment changing. I think growing up, I would see these places and just I knew where I was at once I saw a certain building either coming from somewhere else. I was like, okay, now I'm home because of this place or this space. And as I started getting older, I started realizing that, you know, some of them were gone. And at an age where you don't know what that even means, right? Where you don't understand the implications of gentrification, you don't understand like the erasure that happens in that. And as I started getting older, I felt almost kind of like, all right, I didn't go away for college. I'm here at home. And clearly my work is trying to explore holding on to my own culture, not just being in Long Beach, but being of Mexican descent, because of assimilation. Growing up and going to Catholic school, and just being around an environment that is completely diverse. There is a very large Latino population in Long Beach, but even where I'm situated, it feels like it's right on the border, right on the cusp of like, if I go this way, it's one neighborhood. If I go this other way, it's another neighborhood. But for me, these spaces that I'm trying to preserve are the spaces that keep me in touch with my own culture. So aware of the precarious state that these places are in, if those are gone, then I feel like a part of my own culture is going to be missing as well. So it's extremely important for me to highlight these places, and even thinking about the aesthetic identity that Anna was talking about, where it's maybe at a subconscious level, we're not trying to be resistant or resilient, and it's just the core of our own identity, which I want to like celebrate in my works and put to the forefront. So
Thank you. I wanted to ask you both one more question before we open it up to the virtual audience that's joining us tonight. And it's more about like the recent works that both of you showed towards the end of your presentations. And I feel like just to maybe like a point to wrap up this last question that you both spoke to. there is the task to like preserve our communities and our cities feels like overwhelming and oftentimes maybe impossible. But I think the ways in which both of you are able to kind of like take a snapshot, and more than that, really kind of like harness like your power as artists to point to like these aesthetics, these designs, these sensibilities, are really like honoring so many like people that work and live in the city. And I enjoy also like hearing you both like talk about how you move through the city, whether it's like walking, running, driving around the neighborhood and taking pictures. I think there's such an overwhelming kind of like outsider, like kind of like perspective that's informed by like mass media of a Los Angeles, that maybe everyone gets to see through cinema, through Hollywood, and there's a Los Angeles or Southern California that you both are representing in a very like honest manner. But I wanted to, Anna, you're making plants, and Christopher, you at some point were talking about your relationship to land, and I was curious to, because plants are like these, just like this, are these like very like, they feel like almost banal like ways of kind of like maintaining a relationship to land and the types of herbs and plants that one grows in a garden or like in a little in pots inside a house, whatever that garden looks like. And I feel like that's such a powerful way to also speak to like how we preserve culture, is not only in this kind of how we impact the built environment, but also recognizing that it is built up, right? And that it does kind of like create a distance to land and our connection to land. So I wanted just to both of you maybe speak a little bit to where you feel like your work is going, and speak to that also, like your relationship to land, if there is one, within your interest.
Yeah, well, in that piece that that you're referencing and that I showed, it's the very last piece. It was all about the connection and that the previous generation had, and now that that I have, right? So like my mom and my grandma, they grew up in basically like a rural part of Mexico, like in a ranch. And so they had access to a lot of land, like they could grow whatever they wanted. And of course, they weren't growing like all of their food, but they were growing a lot of food. And when I would go visit my great grandma in the summers, like they would grow cucumbers and I mean, just everything. And so I started noticing this, this like desire for them to still keep like growing things, but the land is no longer there. And then now you're restricted to, that the little patch of dirt that's like in front of your house and between your house and the sidewalk, or like in LA, we see a lot of like lawns that have been just put asphalt over, concrete over, but they're still like small little like areas that you can grow stuff. But the the land is so like limited, and yet like and I think all like the whole Latino community will still use what's available, like I always think about my very early childhood. We grew up in South Central, and we had like a family across the street that was growing corn in the front yard. And that was like, late 80s, early 90s. And that was like, think about if like a white family were to do that at that time, you know, in LA, like the implications of that. Whereas now it's seen as like, oh yeah, you know, you're like growing your own vegetables and it's all like hip to do that, you know, but that relation to the land has always been there for Latino communities because they had that in Mexico. They had access to the land. But now moving into like this very urban environment, they didn't. And so I saw that through my family, and that piece was really like my family's connection and me sort of like realizing like, oh, that's just like what they're doing. Like they grew that back home, and like every single one of my like aunts uncles has like a ruda plant at their house. Everyone has like nopales. Everyone has, you know, like a rose bush, like, you know, kind of. So yeah, that was I feel like that is where like my art practice is like sort of evolving, where I want to like get even more personal with like the way we're interacting with our built environment.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm definitely thinking about my choice in material, and the primary one being clay. And just thinking about how using clay is a form of like connection to the land, even though I'm so far removed from how I get my clay. Historically, you know, clay was dug out of the ground and worked by its people that were there. So for me, just using that material is kind of like my connection. But I think moving forward, it is, I want to explore how I can even get clay today from the land that I'm on. Like just that advent, or not even call it adventure, but just that I think that journey, and I can already imagine like, you know, access. There's questions of access in trying to find and work with clay that's actually from the land. So I think, yeah, moving forward in my work, it's definitely about, you know, asking these questions regarding my own materials. But yeah, sorry, I got a little lost in there.
No, that's fine. I think, you know, something that when I was responding, I think the question was also responding to just like, just envisioning you like running through space, you know,
Yeah.
you know, collection, that kind of connection to space. Everyone talks about Los Angeles not being a walkable city. Most of those people have cars and have never ridden the bus and
Yeah.
and commute in ways that like millions of people, working class people don't.
Yeah.
And so I just love like kind of like having the images of both of you kind of like navigating this landscape in the way that not so many people, especially people that are new to the city, do. But I wanted to thank you both so much for presenting, sharing your work with us, and your candor, and just the thoughtfulness in how you practice your work and the way that you've spoken to it today. Gabriel, wanted to see if there's any questions. Anyone in the audience that had any questions?
We've opened it up, so if anyone does have questions, you can enter it into the Q&A, and I think all of our panelists will be able to see it. So we can give it like maybe a minute or two more, but no, none yet. But I just want to also echo Rafa's thank you to all of you, and also all of our attendees who are out in like the Zoom void. Thank you all for being part of tonight. This has been really, really special.
Yeah, it was a great pleasure to speak about my work, to hear about more of your work, Anna, and for the questions, Rafa. Thank you.
think there's some thank yous coming through, but maybe you covered all the bases.
Yeah, Alma Ramos says, thank you so much for the presentations and beautiful work.
Oh, nice.
Okay, that's a question actually.
Yeah, are you able to see it? Great.
I
Yeah.
am. So Nova Faith is asking, when it comes to both of your work, what has stood out to you about the way the public or your family has reacted to it?
Mm. I mean, my family is very supportive, and like I said, no one in my family is an artist. So I think like whatever you make, like they're gonna like it. Like that's the way I see it. I always joke around with, or I had this one conversation with a friend who's also like Latino, and he's just like, he has this thing where his mom is always just like, okay, yeah. Like she doesn't understand it, never understands any of the work, but is always like really supportive. And I feel that way, like my family is really supportive. And the public, I've always been really sort of impressed by how much people just, you know, are able to take away so many things from the work that maybe was never there, or I have never intended for these things to be part of the work. But everyone has, everyone comes from such a different some different backgrounds that they're able to see different things in the work, and yet a lot of it is still so um relatable, even though it's so specific to like, oh, Latino communities in LA or Latino communities in the US. Like I feel like a lot of people have still been able to connect with it, even though, they're not part of that background, because I feel like that urban landscape is familiar in a unique way where, yeah, so it just, yeah, but if that's the thing that always sticks out to me is how much people are able to connect with it, even if they're not like a part of the community I'm referencing, or yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something that has stood out to me is people that don't recognize these places as being in their neighborhoods have come up and been like, oh, this reminds me of a spot that is like down in San Diego or something like that. So once I started hearing that, I really began to recognize that even though I'm referencing very specific locations, they are recognizable and hold, I think, the same amount of value and kind of, I'll use that word precious to not only me or somebody that's from Long Beach, but to other people from different cities. So yeah, I would say that the response has been really positive. And I think even when I kind of began to make art or think about my own art practice, I was really thinking about accessibility. And if I'm making artwork that's like highly conceptual and inviting like my family to see the work, it would have been a different response. I enjoy making work that I think all audiences can look at and appreciate, or be critical of. But it's great to have like family members who aren't even in art look at the work and have a relationship to it or have positive feedback.
Yeah, there's so many entry points into both of your works, and the way that you're like looking at the city and the way that you're approaching your ideas. So I love that, how accessible it also is.
Mhm.
There's another question by Alma Ramos. They're asking, in relation to your work, how do you get to know a neighborhood? Maybe both of you already answered part of the question, but Christopher mentioned running through his neighborhood on foot. Neighborhoods are much bigger. An area of about a mile, which feels very intimate, actually becomes very dense, very particular and loaded. So how do you work in a very focused way?
I would consider myself to be a fairly disciplined person. So getting into the studio and spending a good amount of time in like 8 to 10 hours, taking a lot of photos, referencing Google Maps, and tapping into my own memory. I think that's really much how I make my work is through those three things, or four: visiting the actual sites, taking my own photo and documentation, and then like using Google Maps and my memory. So it's very much a matter of getting into the studio and kind of mapping out the place that I'm gonna make, and then thinking on a larger scale, like, okay, what do I remember about this place? Like, what feeling do I get when I'm thinking about this spot? Or what do I usually see when I'm around it? So it's a lot of asking questions and just getting myself to sit down and like make the work.
Anna, is there could I ask you like a question about like memory, just because your installations, especially Salon of Beauty,
Yeah.
that feels like it does feel like an amalgamation, and I wonder if like memory comes into play in terms of like how you construct the installation.
Yeah, a lot of the times, maybe not for that piece in particular, but I do feel like part of why I have never like um made a direct representation of like a building that's out there, it's because I like that idea of like looking at something and it reminds you, very similar to having a memory, a moment of something like in your past of when you look at a building. And so when I created that really big installation, it was sort of like that. You want to get like this feeling of like you had been in the space, or you know the space is familiar, but you can't really like clock it, as because it doesn't really exist out in the world, you know. So I think it plays into that. Like when I think about like memory in my work, it's sort of like I'm not ever really like pinpointing a specific building or a specific location, because I want it to be like it's like a romanticized version, right, of like of a space. And so you look at it and you're like, yeah, that like kind of reminds me of this area, this reminds me of this or that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like it really does that. I feel like even just seeing like images of it and seeing like the textures of like a cinder block wall, you know, and
Yeah.
seeing that against like a brightly colored wall, and then seeing like the built up like sign painting, like sign painting that you see on walls
Yeah.
against more commercial kind of like it's um at some point, like all of those symbols um, um, don't matter necessarily, or not that they don't matter, but it's the ways in which they're rendered and the way that you're kind of like representing them that kind of like creates this, yeah, it kind of like triggers like our catalog of visual imagery that we collect just by kind of like being in the city.
Yeah.
And I feel like,
And
go
yeah,
ahead.
some people naturally collect like these little things, like Christopher, I'm sure you know you're somebody that does that. Like you naturally like look at these things, and then but other people don't relate to their environment that way. But then after they've seen our work, I'm sure that now they go back out into the environment and they're like, oh, that's kind of like this and that, like, oh, you know. Yeah.
I just want to look at time because I know we're like,
Okay.
I think we have about five more minutes. So
there is another question.
Oh yeah.
Says that you both began your projects with photographs, which you then turned into models or actual spatial installations. Can you talk about the idea of translations and form of transition and how do you decide what is important to you? I would maybe add to that that maybe that's not offer up that that's like a maybe a resource, but not necessarily like a beginning point. But I am interested in like how this information, whether it be like through memory, through photographic, like kind of like references, videos, or just being in the spaces, like what that translation looks like for you. And
Yeah, well, in the very beginning, I actually used actual photographs that I would take in my very like early work. Some of the pieces, yeah, in the beginning, those were actual, like when there was a window with like the iron bars or a door with the iron bars, those were actual photographs that I took and that I took out like while I was on these like little walking trips, you know, to like get references or to get inspirations. Like if I saw a door that I liked, I would take a picture of it. If I saw a window, I would take a picture of it. And a lot of times, like I would be in the reflection of these like photographs, and then the photographs would make their way back into the work. And then as I think just as like time has gone on, I've been using less actual photographs in the work, but yeah, they've always just been, the photographs are just like a documentation, right? Like a point of reference that like you can easily have while you're in the studio and like trying to find motivation, really.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and answer Brianna's question. It asks what are I'll answer the other question as well, but just wanted to address this one, which is what are both of you eager to explore in your next project or body of work? And for me, that's definitely, I want to begin to incorporate a lot more of imagination and incorporating kind of in almost how Anna created the amalgamation of just different symbols and references to the work that she's looking at in one piece, and I'm hoping to do that as well. And then going back to translation, I think for me it starts off with the actual form of the building. So for me, looking at the scale of it and like where the windows are placed, where the doors are placed, and I'll actually play around with that a little bit, just structurally to make sure that it's going to work with clay. And then when it comes to choosing what is important to me, I just kind of base it on an intuitive feeling a lot of the time. Is it something that I can relate to personally? Is it something that I know that one of my friends has a relationship to it? Or thinking about like my own personal or family history, or just like my Mexican heritage at large. So I'm going to talk about one specific like painting, which is on the 98-cent outlet shop. And there's a painting in there that is of like paletas, like ice creams, you know, of like Bugs Bunny, Ninja Turtles. And for me, like, I don't even think that was a specific image on that shop. It just had the logo, like Blue Bunny ice creams. But when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, like I know I have so much memory of like either just like being at a soccer game and the paletero man's there, or being at my cousin's house and it's all there and everybody's just so excited. So it's like that kind of feeling that I want to convey. So even when I shared it, it's like I had so many people telling me like, oh, give me this one, give me the Lucas con mango, or you know, the spicy whatever. And I'm just kind of like, it's those stories and those relationships and that energy that I really enjoy and want to like throw into my piece. Yeah.
I love that. There are still a couple more questions. We have like a minute left. So this is both of them are great questions. Let's see if we have time for one. Ivy is asking that they're an animation student in Long Beach and are inspired immensely by community and their family. They love to base a lot of the stories and characters around it, and sometimes feel like they can never completely capture the stories that they want in their work or do it justice and sometimes won't complete a piece or go further in their work because of this. They feel that it's because it's too close to home and it's loaded. Do you ever feel that way? And if so, how do you get past it?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know about this specific situation, but I can speak to like not being able to get past a certain point in your work. And I always like go back to this thing that I heard once, and I can't, it was one of my teachers said it or something. It's like when you're making the work is always going to go up and down, where you start off very confident, and then you hit this point when you're like, this is the ugliest thing ever, and you do not want anything with it, and you question everything, and you have like zero confidence in the work. But I think one thing that you have to push through, and this all it comes from is practice and doing it a long time, is like you have to go back to your knowing and being confident in the skills that you already have and that you've worked for over time, you know. And so I think like just knowing that like everybody goes through it, no matter how successful you are, you're not making work where you're confident 100% all the time in every step. So just knowing that, or just being confident in like the skills that you have, you know, it's like, you know what you can do, and you just like kind of you have to push through it, and it's hard, but yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree any more than what you just said. I've found that within my own practice, that just working through it, and being confident in the skills that I've acquired over the past few years. But I think also in just like recent weeks, I've been writing a lot more and using that practice as a way to like understand my work. And even I think if there's like a loaded like situation that the work is in, I think writing about it can be a helpful practice to like either work through it, get past it, or to just let it be. And I think that sometimes letting something be, and it's hard with clay because things dry up and you can't work on it anymore, but pushing it to the side, and giving yourself that space to kind of just let it breathe. And I think that there's always room to go back to it, for sure.
Thank you. That was beautifully answered by both of you. And I would just also add, kind of building off of like what Anna's saying, is that like, allowing yourself the opportunity to like experiment, and, sometimes letting go of ideas and trying something you've never tried before. And the concept of practice, I feel like couldn't be stressed more, is that like, by just merely practicing what you're doing, you're building a relationship to these ideas. And by the end of this project or the thing that you're working on, you will be like the most wise expert of that idea, because it's your idea.
Yeah.
I think we're at time. Gabriel, do you want to come in and close us up?
We are, but again, thank you all so much for being part of tonight. If you have an opportunity, I hope you'll come up to Santa Barbara and see Christopher's show. And again, thank you all, and all of our audience. Thank you for your participation. It really made tonight beautiful. So have a great night. Thank you all.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.
And we'll make sure the recording of this is available online. So we'll get that up shortly. All right. Have a good night.
Bye.
Night.